I recognized her by the way she walked. Even before I saw her face, something in my chest tightened. She moved slowly, hunched forward, dragging one foot slightly behind the other, as if every step cost her something she no longer had to give. That walk, God help me, I had memorized it once. It was the way she walked when she was exhausted, when life had pressed down on her too hard. I never imagined I would see the woman who was once my wife like this again. I was stepping out of the bank, a manila folder tucked under my arm, thinking about interest rates and paperwork and things that suddenly felt disgustingly small, when I saw her leaning into a dumpster across the street. She was sorting through torn garbage bags with bare, trembling hands, pulling out crushed cans and stuffing them into an old sack slung over her shoulder. My heart stopped. The world shrank to that corner of the sidewalk. There she was, malnourished, hair matted with gray and dirt, clothes stiff with stains, her face hollowed out by hunger and time. And yet it was her, the woman who once slept beside me, who laughed at my stupid jokes, who planned a future with me at our kitchen table like it was something guaranteed. I stood frozen. Memories hit me all at once, the night she left without a real explanation, just a short, cold letter waiting on the counter. "It's for the best, don't look for me." That abandonment hollowed me out for years. I went from anger to bitterness to a quiet sadness that never really left. I rebuilt my life brick by brick, telling myself I'd moved on. And now life was standing her in front of me like this, reduced to invisibility, ignored by everyone passing by. I hated myself for the first thought that crossed my mind. Cross the street, pretend you didn't see her. But something stronger than pride, stronger than fear, pulled me forward, one step, then another. My shoes echoed on the pavement. She lifted her head instinctively. Our eyes met. For a split second, she didn't recognize me. Then memory slammed into her like a wave. Her face drained of color, her hands shook. She tried to back away, like I was a ghost sent to collect something she could never repay. "Is that you?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. She dropped her gaze. "You shouldn't see me like this," she whispered. "Forget it, just go. But before we continue, I want to invite you to support this story. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below which city you're listening from. It truly helps these stories reach more people. Now let's continue. I didn't leave. I stood there, heart pounding, taking in every detail. The cracked shoes, fingers split from the cold, eyes sunken deep from hunger. Nothing about her resembled the confident woman who once worked beside me, who spoke with fire about her career and our plans. "Why are you living like this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "After everything, I need to know." She glanced around nervously like someone might be listening. "You were never supposed to see me again," she said. "I made sure of that." "Made sure of what?" I demanded. "What did you do, Claire?" That's when she looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "It was to protect you." The words knocked the air out of my lungs. Protect me from what? I reached for her arm as her knees buckled. Her body gave up before she could answer. She collapsed right there on the sidewalk like a tree that had stood too long in a storm. I shouted for help. Strangers gathered. Someone called 911. I knelt beside her, cradling her head in my lap, the same way I used to when she got sick years ago. I never thought I'd hold her like this again. Fragile, broken. In the ambulance, the paramedic said she was severely dehydrated, anemic, showing signs of long-term malnutrition. All I could hear was her voice. "It was to protect you." At the hospital, doctors told me she'd been seen sleeping in makeshift shelters, refusing assistance, carrying no identification. When she finally woke up, I was still there. "Leave," she said immediately. "My mess isn't your responsibility. You don't stop being part of my life just because you disappeared," I replied. "And I'm not going anywhere until you tell me the truth." She hesitated, then whispered, "I didn't lose everything because I failed." "Then why?" I asked. "I lost everything because I obeyed." "Obeyed who?" She turned her face to the wall. Her silence was heavier than any confession. That night I slept upright beside her hospital bed, replaying our marriage, the unexplained arguments, the legal papers that followed her disappearance, the debts I inherited without understanding why. At dawn, she opened her eyes again, and the look she gave me told me the truth I was about to uncover would change everything I thought I knew. "Everything I lost so that you would stay alive," he said. "And even then, you hated me." The words landed like a slow, crushing weight on my chest. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I thought you betrayed me." A tear cut through the dirt on his cheek, leaving a clean line behind. "That's what I needed you to believe," he said. That was the only way. In that moment, something inside me shattered. I understood that the resentment I had carried for years wasn't mine alone. It had been planted, designed, carefully cultivated by a lie that protected me while it destroyed him. The misery he was living in wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck or weakness. It was the cost of a sacrifice. I still didn't know who had been behind it. I didn't yet understand the danger that had stalked me back then, but something ignited inside me, an urgent, burning need to uncover the truth. I reached for his hand, slowly, afraid he might pull away. His fingers were thin, rough, barely holding warmth. "Rest," I told him quietly. "This time you're not alone." As he closed his eyes beneath the harsh white hospital lights, I realized our reunion, among trash bags and aluminum cans, hadn't been an accident. It was the beginning of something far bigger, something capable of destroying lives and changing mine forever. He slept most of the next day, sedated, exhausted by years of neglect. I stayed. Not because I knew exactly why, but because I knew that if I left, something vital would disappear into the shadows again. Watching his chest rise and fall with effort, memories began pushing their way into my mind without permission. I met him when I was 28. He was a man full of plans, big words, strong hands. The kind of man who worked until his body ached but still looked at me like I was the prize he'd somehow won. He promised stability, a home, security, quiet weekends, a future we could breathe inside, and for years he delivered. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy in our own way. I worked, managed the house, stretched every dollar. He built things, fixed things, dreamed out loud. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We argued. We hurt each other in small ways. There were silences that lingered longer than they should have, but I never imagined it would end the way it did, cold. Sudden, without shouting, without explanations, without a single word that let me understand. One morning he didn't come home from work. 2 days passed. I went to police stations, hospitals, his office. No one knew anything. On the third day, a lawyer knocked on my door. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter written in his handwriting. "Forgive me, it's for the best. Don't try to look for me." That was the day my world started breaking from the inside. For weeks I called him, left messages, wrote emails. His number vanished, no replies, nothing. Then the rest came. Debts I didn't know existed, accounts drained, properties foreclosed. Legal papers arrived one after another like poisonous rain. In less than 6 months I lost everything: my husband, my home, my stability. At 47, I was starting over in a rented room with nothing but questions and shame. People looked at me differently, some with pity, others with suspicion. "You must have done something," they said. I let them talk. I didn't even understand myself. For years, I hated him for disappearing, for leaving me alone with creditors and whispers and memories, for not fighting, for erasing himself like our life had been a mistake. That night, sitting beside his hospital bed, that hate finally cracked. When he woke again, I asked the nurses to leave. I closed the door carefully. "Tell me everything," I said. "Don't lie anymore. There's no point now." He was silent for a long time. His breathing was heavy. Then he spoke. "The day I disappeared," he said, "was the day I was supposed to die." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "Because that's what I was ordered to do," he replied. "Disappear or you wouldn't survive." I stared at him. "Who gave you that order?" He swallowed hard. "Dangerous people," he said. "Very dangerous people." This wasn't panic talking, this was memory. "I was accused of fraud I didn't commit," he continued. "A project where I only signed what they forced me to sign. When I tried to report it, they showed me false evidence, bought witnesses." Then he paused, and a photograph. My stomach dropped. "Of you," he said quietly. Walking out of our building, I felt ice crawl up my spine. "They told me if I spoke, if I tried to clear my name, you would pay the price. And that's why you ran," I said. "I didn't run," he replied bitterly. I erased myself. He told me he accepted the blame for a crime that wasn't his. Signed agreements, handed over assets, let our accounts be drained so the story would look real, so no one would ever question it. He became the villain on paper so I could stay alive, so they would know the blackmail worked, he finished. The words settled between us like dust after an explosion. I sat there, unable to speak, unable to breathe properly. Everything I had believed for decades collapsed inward, folding over itself like a house built on rot. The anger that had fueled me for years didn't disappear, it transformed. It became something heavier, sharper. "You let your life fall apart," I said quietly, "on purpose. So they would never look at you again," he replied. "So they would see me as finished, broken." Harmless, I pressed my palms together, fingers trembling. Crying felt too small for what was tearing through me. "All those years," I whispered, "everything I lost was to protect me." "To save your life," he said. I covered my mouth. 40 years of resentment crumbled in a single breath, leaving behind nothing but grief and a hollow ache where certainty used to live. "Then why didn't you ever come back?" I asked. "Even once, because they never stopped watching," he said. Every time I tried to get close, someone reminded me you were still alive because I was obedient. That was when I understood. His misery wasn't collateral damage. It was a condition. That night I didn't sleep. I wandered the hospital corridors like a ghost, my reflection flickering in glass walls and dark windows. My memories replayed themselves, but altered, rewritten with a cruel clarity. My ruin. My shame, my loneliness, none of it had been random. It had all been part of the same mechanism of control. At dawn, I returned to his bedside with something new burning inside me. I can't unhear this, I said. I'm not the scared man I used to be. He looked at me with fear, real fear. Don't dig into the past, he warned. The past kills. So does silence, I said. And I've been silent for too long. He tried to sit up, panic creeping into his voice. If you talk, they'll come. Let them, I said, steady now. This time you won't be alone. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes, not for himself. For me, you don't know who you're dealing with, he murmured. And you don't know how much of my life your silence cost me, I replied. He cried then, soundless, restrained, like a man who had trained himself never to be heard. That same day, strangers began appearing in the hospital. Men who didn't look like family, didn't carry flowers, didn't ask the right questions. They hovered, watched, asked nurses about rooms that didn't exist. Thaddeus grabbed my hand. They've started, he whispered. I looked at him with the calm of someone who had already lost too much to retreat. Then the end of this story has started too. Because if he had become a ghost to save me, I was now willing to become the man who brought him back and made those who destroyed him answer for it. The hospital no longer felt neutral. Every hallway carried tension. Every unfamiliar face felt loaded with intent. That night while he slept, I sat alone in the waiting room, my head burning. I thought about the debts, the humiliation, the years of explaining myself to people who had already decided my guilt. Every memory darkened with new meaning. It had all been a performance, and I had been the only one not given the script. At dawn, I returned to his room. He woke slowly, fear flickering in his eyes as if he thought the truth had driven me away. I'm still here, I said. Relief crossed his face. After a long silence, I spoke again. I want the names. He closed his eyes, gripping the sheet. Not all names are spoken, he said. Some are only said once and then they end you. My life was already in danger without me knowing it, I replied. You won't carry this alone anymore. He took a deep breath. It started with a public works project, he said. Multi-million-dollar. I was only the technical lead, but the contracts were poisoned, ghost companies, inflated invoices, money bleeding out through shell accounts. His voice cracked. When I found it, I thought reporting it was the right thing. That night, he continued, I got the first threat. At first, he thought he could escape by paying, resigning, disappearing. But they didn't just want silence, he said. They wanted a scapegoat, someone clean, someone credible, someone like him. When they realized I wouldn't break, he said quietly, they brought you into it. My chest tightened. They showed me photos, he went on, your routines. The places you were alone, they said accidents happen every day. Suddenly, moments from my past snapped into focus, times I'd felt watched, followed, uneasy for no reason. It hadn't been paranoia. That's when I agreed, he whispered. I signed everything, gave up everything, disappeared without goodbye. So I would hate you, I said, so you wouldn't look for me, he replied. So they would know the threat worked. The room fell silent again. And in that silence, I understood one final thing. This wasn't over on me, he finished quietly. I cried without sound, and everything they took from us, I asked, the accounts, the house. It was part of the price, he said. It had to look like I destroyed myself through my own mistakes. And you really lost everything, I said bitterly. He nodded. Because when a monster realizes it can take, it never stops. He tried to continue, but a violent coughing fit bent his body forward. I rushed to his side and called the nurse. While she worked, adjusting the oxygen and checking his vitals, I noticed a man at the far end of the hallway. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't sitting, he was watching, too still, too focused. When our eyes met, he turned immediately and walked away. Fear slid back into me like ice water. That afternoon, a doctor asked to speak with me privately. He explained that Thaddeus needed further tests. His condition was serious but stable. Before leaving, he lowered his voice. Be careful with visitors, he said. Today, 3 people asked for him who don't appear to be family or friends. My knees nearly gave out. When I returned to Thaddeus's room, my decision was already carved into my chest. I can't keep listening to half-truths, I said. If you're going to tell me everything, do it now. We don't know how much time we have. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment. There's something I never told you, he said finally. The night I disappeared, I buried something. My heart tightened. Under the old workshop where I used to work, he continued, a A metal box, no one else knows about it. What's inside? I asked. The original documents, he said. Proof of everything, the embezzlement, the shell companies. The signatures, my breath caught. Why didn't you use them? Because then you would have died, he replied simply. Silence stretched between us. But now, he added, they know I've surfaced. Staying quiet may no longer make sense. I understood then that his silence hadn't only protected me, it had protected countless others who lived unaware of the machinery grinding beneath their lives. I'm going for that box, I said. No, he said sharply, it's dangerous. It's more dangerous to wait, I replied. You already sacrificed your life for me once. I won't let you do it again. He studied me, searching for hesitation. There was none. Finally, he nodded. Behind a false shelf, he said. In the back of the shop, everything is there. That night, I barely slept. Every shadow felt like movement. Every sound felt like warning. At dawn, I left the hospital with my heart clenched tight. I took a taxi to the south side, to the old workshop, now a forgotten warehouse reeking of oil and dust. I moved slowly, listening, breathing shallow. I found the shelf, shifted boxes, ran my fingers along the wall until I felt the irregular seam. I dug with a rusty tool I found nearby. My hands shook when metal touched metal. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside were folders sealed with tape, thumb drives, contracts bearing real signatures, photographs, recordings, enough evidence to bury more than one powerful name. Fear and resolve twisted together inside me. As I left the workshop, a car half a block away started its engine. I didn't look back. I walked into a crowded store, waited, watched. The car circled once, then disappeared. The game was no longer hidden. I returned to the hospital with the box inside an ordinary shopping bag. Thaddeus was awake. When he saw my eyes, he knew. I nodded once. Now they're not just chasing us, he said quietly. They're chasing the truth. Let them, I replied. I'm done hiding it. Crossing that threshold felt irreversible. I was no longer the man who cried seeing his ex-wife collecting cans. I was the keeper of a truth capable of collapsing empires. I carried the box against my chest like something alive, decades of lies, injustice, and a life destroyed without explanation. When I entered his room again, he looked at me like someone returning from war. I found it, I said, placing the bag beneath the bed. Tears filled his eyes. He closed them briefly, as if whispering a prayer. There's no turning back, he said. There never was, I replied. For hours we didn't open the box. We listened to the hospital breathe around us, gathering strength for what came next. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened it. Folders labeled by years, dates, stamps. Names I didn't recognize, but he did. Photographs of construction sites, maps, payment ledgers. And then I saw something that made my blood turn cold. My name, my accounts, my properties. My life documented, tracked, manipulated, like I'd been a line item in someone else's ledger all along. And in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about what they had done to him. This was about what they had planned to do to me. And they had no idea how much of their power was now sitting under a hospital bed, my forged signatures. I stared at them, unable to breathe. Documents where my name appeared as a debtor for sums so large they felt unreal. Contracts linking me to shell companies I had never heard of. Everything engineered so that if anyone ever investigated me, I would look like the criminal. The room spun. I had to close my eyes. All of this came after you left, I whispered. The debts, the seizures. I thought it was just the aftermath of your abandonment. It wasn't abandonment, he said, his voice breaking. It was a sacrifice, and even that wasn't enough to fully protect you. Images surged through me like a flood breaking old dams. The day they evicted me without meeting my eyes. The court notice that erased my savings. The humiliation of borrowing money from relatives who used to admire me. The nights staring at the ceiling, trying to understand debts I had never made. The years I became a burden instead of a person. I cleaned houses, I said, my throat burning. In my 50s, I went hungry. I slept on borrowed couches. And while I was falling apart, they were laundering money in my name. I clenched one of the documents until my fingers ached. Why didn't you warn me, Thaddeus? I cried. Even if they had killed me, at least I would have known the truth. No, he said desperately, because I still had one chip to negotiate for your life. I looked at him, confused. Every time someone doubted my silence, he continued, I showed them a photo of you, proof of why I was still obeying. My tears splashed onto the papers. So my misery was part of the theater, I said. Yes, he nodded. So it would look like we were both destroyed, so no one would dig deeper. I stumbled out of the room and collapsed onto a bench in the hallway. I stared at my hands, aged, rough, marked by work I never understood why I had to do. Now I knew someone had decided I had to fall so a ring of criminals could remain standing. That night I didn't sleep. I opened the box alone in a small room and read everything, page by page, date by date. Names surfaced, names I had heard on the news, surnames tied to corporations, to politics, to men considered untouchable. Without knowing it, I had been a screen for a vast corruption network. They hadn't just stolen Thaddeus's life. They had stolen mine. At dawn, I returned to his room. I know what I lost, I told him. Now I want to know who took it from me. He pressed his lips together. If we go all the way, he said, there will be no forgiveness. Only prosecutions, people will fall. I don't want blind revenge, I replied. I want justice with names and surnames. He looked at me with pride and fear. Justice kills slowly, he warned. I died slowly for years, I answered. Now it's their turn to fall without masks. From that day on, I stopped being only a woman wounded by the past. I began making calls, quiet ones, to banks, to courts, to people who once refused to hear me. The documents became my key. Where doors had slammed shut before, now they opened cautiously, silently. Some told me it was impossible. Others said it was too late. A few warned me it was dangerous. I know, I always replied. Danger followed me my whole life without my consent. Now I choose it. Thaddeus grew worse. His body, worn down by years of deprivation, was failing. I watched him sleep and wondered if he would live to see the end. That thought crushed me. One afternoon, he took my hand with what little strength he had left. If I don't live to see them fall, he whispered, promise me you won't stop. I promise, I said through tears. This time no one will silence us. Outside the hospital, new faces appeared, dark sedans, men in suits, calls without voices, warnings without threats. They were moving too, but I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't the deceived woman from before. I was the woman who had learned why her life was taken. And when someone understands why they fell, they become far more dangerous than before, because they're no longer fighting just to survive. They're fighting to reclaim every stolen year, and I was only beginning. That night, the hospital room lay in half darkness when I returned after another day of calls and careful meetings. He slept restlessly. Every breath looked heavy. When he opened his eyes, guilt and gratitude flickered across his face. They've started moving, haven't they? He whispered. Yes, I said. They know the documents exist. He closed his eyes. Then there's no easy way out. There never was, I replied. But now it's not just you against them. Silence fell. Then I leaned closer. There's something else you haven't told me, Thaddeus. I can see it in your eyes. And I need it now. His face hardened. For the first time, he said slowly, they didn't just want your silence. He swallowed. They wanted your disappearance. For the first time since I had reunited with him, I saw real terror in his eyes. That is the one thing I should never have told you, he murmured. Because once you know, there is no turning back. There was no turning back the moment I saw you collecting cans, I replied. Speak. He took a long time. His breathing slowed as if he were measuring the cost of each word. Finally, in a voice so low it barely reached me, he said, if I talk, if I say the full names, they kill you. The words struck me like a blow to the stomach. Just like that, I whispered. Just like that, he confirmed. They're not just corrupt businessmen. There are people from the state, officials, bought judges, people who make files disappear and people disappear. A chill ran through my spine. I finally understood the scale of what we were facing. This wasn't only about money. It was about power, raw, protected, untouchable power. That's why I agreed to fall, he continued. Because when they put your photo on the table and said everything could look like a mugging, an accident, I knew I wasn't negotiating my life. He looked at me. I was negotiating yours. My eyes burned with tears. And I hated you for years, I said. I buried you alive in my heart. That's what kept me alive, he replied. As long as you hated me, you were safe. I covered my face with my hands. Every memory of rage I had carried for decades twisted into something unbearable, into a form of love so extreme it had destroyed both of us. Tell me the names, I insisted. Even if they kill me tomorrow, he shook his head. Not yet. First, we secure the evidence. The box isn't enough. They can erase records, start fires, stage assaults, accidents. The truth has to come out in a way they can't bury. How? I asked, with the press, clean prosecutors, international eyes if necessary. I inhaled slowly. This was no longer a family tragedy. It was a war. Then tell me about them, I said, without names for now. Thaddeus closed his eyes and began to speak in fragments, a consortium of companies, rigged bids, millions diverted through shell accounts, projects paid for but never finished. Officials who signed contracts in exchange for envelopes, lawyers whose job was silencing anyone who questioned the system. He told me about an accountant found dead, labeled a suicide. An engineer who fled after a false charge, a councilman who died in a home accident. They all knew too much, he whispered, like me. And without ever realizing it, I had been the bargaining chip that kept him obedient. That night I left the hospital with a knot in my chest. I walked the sidewalk watching every stranger, every shadow. For the first time I felt fear that was physical, not just emotional. Still, I didn't stop. The next day, with the help of an old journalist who had once investigated major corruption cases, I began to move carefully. I showed him only a small portion of the documents, just enough. He went pale. "If this is real," he said, "more than one person will want your head." "They already did," I replied. "I just didn't know it." That afternoon, the first warning arrived. A folded note slipped under the door of my rental apartment. "Leave the past where it is or go with it." My hands shook, but I didn't retreat. That night I returned to the hospital. Thaddeus looked at me the moment I entered. "They warned you," he said. I nodded. "Yes." "They've started, then the clock is ticking," he murmured, "and not in our favor." He gripped my hand with a strength that didn't match his fragile body. "Listen to me," he said. "If this goes wrong, promise me you won't save me." "Save yourself?" "No," I answered immediately. "You saved yourself once for me. Now we either save ourselves together or we fall together." His eyes filled with something I couldn't name. "That stubbornness," he said softly, "was always your greatest virtue and your greatest danger." I smiled for the first time in days. In that moment everything became clear. They had bet on my fear, on my silence, on my fragility. But I was no longer the woman who cleaned houses believing life had punished her for no reason. Now I knew why they destroyed me, and I knew exactly who I was fighting. Before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave yet, because what comes next will give you chills. That night, I made a final decision. I wasn't just going to clear Thaddeus's name. I was going to expose the entire network that had stolen his life and mine, even if it cost me my peace, even if it cost me my future, even if it cost me my life. Because this was no longer just about justice. It was about making sure a man's sacrifice didn't remain buried among cans and trash. And I was ready to make the people who thought they could play God with our lives tremble. The journalist agreed to meet me in a discreet cafe, far from the usual routes, far from familiar eyes. And as I stepped inside, I had no idea that this meeting would change everything, or that someone else was already waiting to make sure it never happened. Hospital, far from my home, far from anything that could expose us. I carried only a thin folder taken from the metal box, nothing more. I couldn't risk everything at once. When we met, the journalist arrived with a worn notebook and the eyes of someone who had seen too many truths to believe in coincidences anymore. "Tell me why I should put my life at risk at 70 years old, he said bluntly. I opened the folder. I showed him only 2 documents, an impossible transfer, a public bid with forged signatures. The color drained from his face. "This," he whispered, "this is dynamite. Where did you get this?" "From a man they forced to disappear to save me." He didn't ask anything else. He knew some answers didn't belong in cafes. That same afternoon, I told Thaddeus the process had begun. He looked paler than ever. The illness was eating him slowly, relentlessly. "Then there's no return," he murmured. There never was. That night, while the city slept, the first direct blow arrived. The journalist called me, his voice strained. "They ransacked my office," he said. "They didn't take valuables, only files. And they left a note." My chest tightened. What did it say? "We only warn once." Cold slid down my spine. They were watching us closely. I moved immediately. We distributed encrypted copies of the evidence to places no one would suspect, one in a small provincial bank, another hidden by the journalist in a location he refused to name. I kept a minimal copy, a last line of defense. That same week, a young district attorney agreed to review the material discreetly. We met after dark. He studied the documents in silence. "If this is authentic," he said finally, "we're talking about a network that's been operating for over 20 years. "It is," I replied. "My life was destroyed to hide it." He met my eyes, grave. "Then you're not just seeking personal justice, you're about to touch very powerful people." "They touched first," he nodded. "I'll protect this file as if it were my family." I left trembling, not from fear, but vertigo. 2 nights later, I returned home and found the door slightly ajar, drawers overturned, papers scattered. Photos thrown across the floor, nothing stolen except one thing, my wedding album. The message was unmistakable. "We know who you are. We know who you love." At dawn, I hugged Thaddeus without a word. "They're going to hit where it hurts most," he whispered. "They already did," I replied, but it was a lie. Fear for him could still destroy me. Days later, the blow came that almost ended everything. His condition worsened suddenly: fever, respiratory failure. They rushed him to intensive care. If he survives the next 48 hours, the doctor said, he has a chance. I spent the night staring at a white wall, thinking he might never see the truth exposed. That his sacrifice might end without justice. Guilt crushed me. At dawn, the district attorney called. We're executing the first raids today. So soon, my heart pounded. If we wait, they erase everything. They're already trying. The hours that followed were a blur. Short calls, fragmented updates, offices raided, servers seized, executives summoned. That afternoon, the journalist sent one message: this is going to explode, and it did. That same night, the first figures fell. A consortium president detained, a manager fled, an ex-official sacrificed by his own party. The country began to murmur, but the enemy struck back. Leaving the hospital, a car swerved toward me, too precise to be an accident. An orderly tripped at the exact moment, knocking me backward. The car grazed past me and disappeared. I understood then there was no margin for error. That night I sat beside Thaddeus's bed while he remained unconscious. They can't hide anymore, I whispered. Everything is falling, don't give up now. A tear slid down my cheek. At dawn, his eyes opened. Are they still alive? He asked faintly. Very alive, I said, and very nervous. He almost smiled. Then it was worth it. I squeezed his hand. It's not over. 2 days later, the district attorney summoned me urgently. I entered his office with my pulse racing. We have enough to go to trial, he said. Names, money trails, recordings, everything. He paused. And the biggest name is finally exposed. My breath caught. For a moment I realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. This was no longer about whether we would survive. It was about whether the truth would, and it already had a life of its own. One's. The district attorney remained silent for a second. I felt my legs trembling. Then, is it now or never? I asked. Exactly. When I left his office, I understood with absolute clarity that the story that had begun among trash bags and aluminum cans had reached its point of no return. We were no longer just two victims. We were the fracture through which an entire empire was collapsing. That night I leaned close to Thaddeus's bed. They're going to fall, I whispered. All of them. He closed his eyes with a peace I hadn't seen in decades. Then I can go in peace when it's time. Don't talk like that, I pleaded. Someone has to pay for the silences of the righteous too, he replied softly. Only then did I understand that the file hadn't just changed the fate of a country. It had rewritten the destiny of a man who chose to lose everything so I could keep breathing. And now, for the first time, his truth was about to be written in ink no one could erase. The first name appeared on the news early Tuesday morning. I was sitting beside Thaddeus when the anchor pronounced, with solemn gravity, the name of a businessman everyone admired. I saw him on the screen in handcuffs, his face covered by a trembling hand. A shiver ran through me. It wasn't joy, it was vertigo. It started, I whispered. Thaddeus opened his eyes with effort and looked at the screen. I never thought I'd live to see this, he said faintly. That same day, the second and the third fell, raids across the city, servers seized, offices sealed with police tape. Men who had walked escorted by power for decades now lowered their heads before the cameras, but nothing came cleanly. Every fall provoked a counterattack. Anonymous calls flooded the hospital. Strangers lingered too long near the door. A note slipped beneath Thaddeus's wheelchair. This isn't over yet. 2 days later, the district attorney summoned me again. We need your formal testimony, he said, not as his ex-wife, but as the primary custodian of the evidence. I felt the weight settle on my shoulders. Is it safe? I asked. At this point, he replied honestly, nothing is, but without you, some of them will negotiate their escape. I agreed. The day of my testimony, the courthouse was surrounded by cameras. As I entered, every gaze pierced me. I, 67 years old, invisible for so long, was now the keystone of a process shaking half the country. Inside the courtroom, they were there, impeccable suits, broken dignity. I recognized 2 names Thaddeus had once whispered to me in the hospital. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. The district attorney laid out dates, figures, contracts. Then he called me to the stand. Do you recognize these documents? He asked. Yes, I replied. For years, I thought they were the cause of my ruin. Today, I know they were the mechanism of their crime. A murmur rippled through the room. And can you explain how they came into your possession? I took a deep breath. I told everything. The workshop, the buried box, Thaddeus's disappearance, the threats, the persecution. I omitted nothing. Each word fell like a stone on the men who had spent decades moving lives as if they were expendable pieces. One of them jumped to his feet. This woman is lying, he shouted. She's manipulated by a criminal. The judge slammed his gavel. That woman, he said coldly, is the reason we are here today, and you gentlemen are the reason she lived marked by ruin. My knees gave way. The district attorney steadied me as I sat down. By the end of the hearing, there was no doubt left. The evidence was overwhelming. Several pretrial detentions were ordered that same day. Some begged, some bargained. 2 requested protection, fearing retaliation. The castle was collapsing from the inside. I returned to the hospital with my heart pounding. Thaddeus was awake. Did they fall? He asked. Yes, I said through tears. They started to fall. He closed his eyes and smiled, a smile that hurt more than any pain. Then I can rest a little. Don't you dare, I told him, squeezing his hand. The most important part is still missing. What's missing? He asked, clearing your name. 3 days later, the final piece fell into place. A high-level official, untouchable until then, was arrested trying to leave the country with false documents. On his computer were direct records of the operation, and there it was, clear instructions: make Thaddeus take the fall, maintain the narrative, protect the top. The district attorney came personally to the hospital. Mr. Thaddeus, he said solemnly, you are officially exonerated. All charges against you are dismissed. Thaddeus stared at him, confused. That means, the DA continued, you were the victim of criminal extortion. And your sacrifice dismantled one of the largest corruption networks in the country. Thaddeus began to cry silently, like a man who had learned to suffer without sound. I held him carefully. We did it, I whispered. After all these years, we did it, but justice always demands its price. That same early morning, without warning, his condition worsened. Alarms rang, doctors rushed in. I was pushed gently but firmly out of the room. I stood alone in the hallway, shaking, realizing with cruel clarity that while truth had finally arrived, time might not be on our side. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I prayed not for justice, but for one more moment. One more breath, one more chance to tell him that his sacrifice had not been in vain. Internal bleeding, alarms, doctors running. I stood outside the emergency room with my hands pressed to my chest, praying to a God I hadn't dared speak to in years. Not bargaining, not demanding, just begging quietly, desperately for one more moment. Hours passed, endless, shapeless hours. When the doctor finally came out, his face said what his mouth barely could. We did everything possible, he murmured, but his body was very weakened. The world split in two. I entered the room on unsteady legs. Thaddeus lay there, connected to machines, his eyes closed, his face peaceful in a way that terrified me. I took his hand. You carried the truth with you until the end, I whispered, and now everyone knows it. He opened his eyes one last time. He looked at me with a love so pure it hurt. It was worth it, he said barely. You are alive and they won't hate you because of me anymore. A tear slid down his cheek. I never hated you, I whispered. I lied so he could leave in peace. He died with a small smile still resting on his lips. His death was a minor headline compared to the scandal shaking the country, but for me it was an earthquake. I mourned him in silence, away from cameras, away from speeches. Just me, his truth, and the unbearable weight of stolen years. Days later, after I buried Thaddeus, one of the prosecutors approached me. There will be financial reparations, he said, and a public apology for his case. I looked at him, exhausted. None of that will return the years he lost, I replied, but maybe it will stop others from losing theirs. That night I returned home alone. I turned on a small lamp and sat on the bed without strength. The network had fallen. The guilty were imprisoned or fleeing. The truth filled every newspaper. Justice had arrived, but the love that had sustained it all was gone. Still, something settled inside me. The revenge I had sought was never about humiliation. It was about truth standing upright, and that had already happened. The day after the funeral dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself were mourning. I woke in the quiet of my house, not a threatening silence anymore, but an absence. For years I had lived accompanied by resentment, fear, unanswered questions. Now all of that was gone, and so was Thaddeus. I sat on the bed, waiting to feel something clear. Pain, relief, rage. What came was everything at once, slow, heavy, human. I went outside and walked without direction. The city was alive, children heading to school, vendors shouting prices, people rushing, laughing, living. No one knew what had died inside me. No one knew the price paid to clear a name buried by corruption. Later that day, I was summoned to close the last formalities. In a somber room, the district attorney, a secretary, and a state representative waited. Ma'am, the DA said, the case is officially closed. All main figures have been processed. I nodded. The state will provide financial reparations, he continued, and there will be a public act recognizing the injustice done to you and your ex-husband. He didn't live to hear it, I said quietly. That matters more than money. The DA lowered his eyes. We know. I signed the papers calmly. I accepted the compensation not for myself, but so Thaddeus's sacrifice would leave something tangible behind, proof that nothing had remained buried with him. Outside, journalists waited. Questions flew. I answered none. Thaddeus had endured ruin in silence. I would not turn his life into spectacle. That night at home, I found a white envelope on the table. No sender. Inside, one sentence written by hand. He won, and so did you. No threat, no resentment, just acknowledgement. I tore it up and threw it away. The past no longer had permission to speak to me. As weeks passed, the scandal faded. New headlines replaced old ones. Life continued. Mine, however, was different. I sold the house that had held my years of poverty and bought a modest apartment with a large window facing a park. No luxury, no display. Just light, air, peace. I kept few things: a table, 2 chairs, books, old photographs saved from ruin. One of them showed Thaddeus and me on our wedding day. I framed it simply and placed it on the dresser. Not as a tribute to the husband who disappeared, but to the man who sacrificed himself without me knowing. I began living slowly. Hot coffee in the morning, sunlight through the window, children laughing in the park. For years, I believed the world owed me something. Now I understood something deeper. Life doesn't return what it takes, but sometimes, if you stand your ground, it lets the truth remain, and that is enough. Because love that survives silence, truth that survives fear, and sacrifice that is finally seen, never truly die, I understood then that the only thing life truly owed me was peace. A month after the case officially closed, the public act was held. I didn't want to attend. I told the district attorney I had already said goodbye in my own way. Not for you, he said softly, for history, so I went. In the grand hall of the courthouse, an official statement was read aloud. They named Thaddeus as a victim of large-scale criminal extortion. They acknowledged that he had been deliberately used as a scapegoat, that his life had been dismantled to protect illegal interests far more powerful than him. When they pronounced his full name, I felt the air leave my lungs. They invited me forward. I walked slowly, aware of every step. The room was silent. The district attorney handed me a folder with the final resolution. On behalf of the state, he said, we ask forgiveness for arriving late. I held the folder. I didn't know what to say. There are no words large enough to compensate for a stolen life, and none needed for closure that arrives after death. That night, I returned home and sat by the open window. The wind moved the curtains gently. I thought about the woman I had been when Thaddeus disappeared, about the rage, the hunger, the humiliation, the hate that had kept me standing for years. None of it had been in vain. Every tear, every fall, every unanswered night had led me to the truth, but the price had been enormous. Sometimes it still hurts to think that if I had known earlier, maybe something could have been different. Then I understand that thought is an illusion. They had the power, we had only silence as a shield, and he chose to carry it for me. One afternoon, reviewing the last documents I kept from the box, I found a small folded note hidden between 2 contracts. I recognized the handwriting instantly. If you ever read this, it means I am no longer here. Don't remember me as the man who fell, but as the one who loved you, even when he had to deceive you to save you. Losing you was the highest price. Saving you was my only victory. I cried then like I hadn't cried in months, without shame, without restraint, without pride. I cried for what was, for what could never be, for the life he never got to live. With time, I learned to speak of him without my voice breaking. I learned to tell his story not as a tragedy, but as an extreme act of love. Some called him a hero. I said he was simply a man cornered by power who chose to save the one he loved. At 67, I began again, not with illusions of youth, not with promises, but with something harder and far more valuable: truth. Today I walk without fear. I no longer look over my shoulder. I no longer wait for hidden blows. I no longer hate the man who once disappeared without explanation. Now I know why he did it, and I know what he left me. He left me life, even if it came wrapped in ruin, silence, and pain. It was the greatest gift anyone could give. Because of his sacrifice, today I can say this with a calm heart: I am still here. I am alive. I am free. And for the first time in many years, I am at peace. I sit by the window of my small apartment and watch life pass. Children play in the park. Sunlight filters through the curtain, and I'm not afraid anymore. I don't check who walks behind me. I don't tremble at sounds by the door. I don't suspect every cup I lift to my lips. For too long, I believed I had been abandoned, that the man I loved destroyed me out of selfishness, that my ruin was born of cowardice, and the truth was the opposite. He carried my pain so I could keep breathing. We lost years no one will ever return, years of silence, hunger, humiliation. Years I lived believing I was alone. And now I understand something that still shakes me. All that time, even when I didn't know it, someone was paying for my freedom with his own sentence. I don't celebrate anyone's fall. I don't find peace in prisons or defeat. My peace came when the truth stood, when his name was cleared, when I understood he hadn't lied out of cruelty, but out of love. Today I live with little, but I live calmly. I sleep in peace, I walk without fear. And every morning I give thanks for one simple and enormous thing at the same time. I am still alive, and now I know why. At 67 I don't seek revenge, I seek silence, I seek calm. I seek to honor the sacrifice of a man who carried everything so I wouldn't have to. And I honor him by living without fear, living without resentment, living without chains, because after so much pain, I deserve to rest. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Did this story move you? And which city are you listening from? I'll meet you in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel and help me continue sharing stories like this, you can send a super thanks. It truly means more than you know. On your screen now, you'll see 2 more life stories I recommend. There's much more waiting for you here. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for being here.